Now, at this time of year, we knew that Canon was going to at least bring out something. We knew that they were going to come up with some kind of announcement, some kind of leak until we get a real announcement later this year. We were thinking about the R7 Mark II, we were thinking about the R6 Mark III, but we didn't think about this camera that they just confirmed to compete with the cinema cameras on Sony's end. What's up, you guys? This is Devin with Century FX Studios TV, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the Canon C50. Now, the C50, as it states in its name, is going to be a lower-end cinema model camera, but this is actually supposed to be replacing the R5C. Now, for those of you who knew, the R5C was a camera that really beasted everything out. The R5 came out and it was great at a lot of things, but it did overheat in video, and video was not its strong suit. Then they immediately came out with the R5C. So that tells us that Canon is listening to us, and that tells us that Canon really wants to compete on this video world, in this video market that Sony is really doing great at right now. Now, Sony and Canon are both competing on the same market. They're competing camera to camera. Every time Sony comes out with a camera, Canon comes out with a camera. Like, the Canon just came out with the R50V. This is the R50, but a video-centric version of it, and it looks a lot like the Sony FX30. It looks like that same camera body, and so I thought they were done competing because, or on that segment for this go around, because they've already had a camera like the R50V to compete with the FX30, but the FX30 is also a more expensive model with a lot more goodies in it, but the body style is essentially the same. It's a smaller battery. It's a cheaper price. They definitely gave you, you know, your money's worth on the R50V, but now they're coming out with what they're saying is a C50. Now, they've just came out with a C80. They had the C70, they upgraded it to a C80 recently, and the C80, the footage that I've seen from that is beautiful. It is gorgeous. So if we get just a little bit of the specs from the C80 to trickle down to the C50, then it's going to be amazing. But they're saying that it's going to be a replacement for the R5C. So there's no more DSLR mirrorless style bodies that are going to compete with that style of body. It's now going to be that FX30 style of body that Canon's trying to compete with now. And they have a cheaper variant, like I said, the R50, but now they have the C50, which is crazy because now they're having two competing markets that they're pushing: the lower end of the price bracket, and they're pushing the higher end of the price bracket there. Now, let's talk about what specs we think are coming out in the C50 based on what the FX30 has, because I'm pretty sure that directly competing with the FX30 on the Sony end. Now, the first thing I have on my list is price. Now, it's looking like the FX30 came out at $1799. Canon's competing to be the lower cost camera company right now, so I'm assuming they're going to go with the $1499, somewhere between $1499 $1799, right? And then it's going to be a rangefinder style camera based on the teaser pictures that we saw coming soon to the cinema line. It's going to be just like the Sony FX30 there. Now, going to megapixels, I'm thinking about maybe even a 32.5 plus megapixel sensor. Now, remember, when you think about megapixels and size of sensors, they kind of go hand in hand with the price. That's the first thing they really talk to you about, because that tells you what kind of image it produces, which leads to how much memory it consumes and how much processing power it has. So megapixels is definitely related to that, along with sensor size. If it's an APS-C sensor, like they're saying, then the only APS-C sensor with the highest megapixels at that price point, which is somewhere around $1499 to $1799, is the R7 Mark I, which is the highest megapixel crop frame body that Canon has right now. So that will be 32.5 megapixels. I'm going to inch it up and say maybe 35 or 34 megapixels. Why would I say that? It's because of video resolution, because this is a video-centric camera. If Canon's going to compete on the video-centric specs, then what they're going to have to do is make sure that, you know, it's a little bit more spicier than what Sony came out with, because we came out with it ahead of Sony, right? So even though we copied them a little bit with the marketing, we're trying to compete with them a little bit, we also want to be ahead of the bat when it comes to specs, because it's a newer camera, right? So it's because of the video specs that are going to be higher resolution, that I say that this is probably going to be somewhere around 34 megapixels, a little bit more for your money, maybe even 40 megapixels, but I don't know what that does to the pixel bending of the video. And I'll get to exactly what resolution I think this camera will be in just a moment. And right now we're going to talk about the backside illuminate sensor. Now Canon has its own BSI technology. They just recently came out with it with like the R6 Mark II and newer cameras than that. But they call it back illuminated stack sensor, but it's essentially the competitor to Sony's backside illuminated sensor technology, where they give you better low light results. Now we're going to talk about what size we think the actual resolution of the video would be. I want to say it's going to be 8K. And the reason why I say it's 8K is because if Canon has an 8K camera like the R5C, because they said they were replacing the R5C just with a smaller body, a little bit easier to work with, they're probably going to have 8K, but it's probably going to be IPB or some kind of compressed 8K. When I'm shooting with my R5 Mark I, I find that shooting 8K is not the biggest of issues for it as long as it's compressed. If you go anything like, log 8K or 8K raw or anything like that, or high frame rate 8K, then it has an issue. Or high frame rate 4K at longer periods of time, then it has an issue with overheating and memory consumption, all this other stuff, and what card format you're using and all this other stuff. But you have to understand that Canon doesn't think that higher resolution video, like going up to 6K, is really that much of a next level camera. For example, the R1 doesn't have 8K. I'm pretty sure it does not have 8K, but it's the flagship camera. So with that said, maybe because this is a video-centric camera or a cinema level camera that they're probably going to want to push 8K in this, but I doubt it. I think it's going to be a little bit more washed down versions of what the C80 had, or what the C80 has. It might even have a dual pace ISO, because the FX30 has a dual base ISO. But going back to resolution, I think it's going to have a downsampled 4K sensor or downsampled 7K sensor, depending on how much the resolution is. So if it has 32.5 megapixels, that's equivalent to the R7, which means it would have a 7K oversampled 4K potentially. Or it would have, I want to say, a 34 or 35 megapixel sensor and up. That would give them the ability to do a one-to-one readout with 8K, if I'm not mistaken. And then you could do an HQ video like the R5. The R5 has a 4K HQ video, which looks amazing. And you don't have to shoot in 8K, but it does consume a lot of memory, and it gives you a more beautiful 4K image. So those are some of the things that Canon can do to circumvent having to have 8K in its first APS-C sensor, so to speak, because I don't know of any other APS-C sensors that have 8K, even on the Sony side. But if you know another APS-C sensor that has 8K, let me know in the comments below. I haven't been keeping up with 8K that often. It's more so 6K with these APS-C sensors. Even another camera that competes at the same market, the R6, only has 6K, only if you use an external monitor. So the R6 Mark II has 6K if you use an external monitor, but it does not have any kind of internal 6K, and it doesn't have any type of raw recording unless you're going out to that external monitor. So nothing internally can go over 4K with the R6 Mark II, which is at a competing price right now. Now, this is another reason why another camera won't be coming out pretty soon like we thought, but I'll get into that in just a moment. And let me look at my last couple of points here. IBIS. I believe that this potentially will have IBIS because the FX30 has IBIS, if I'm not mistaken. But the R5C did not have IBIS because a lot of people were complaining about the IBIS wobble. But maybe IBIS looks so good now in Canon's technology that they believe that they can put IBIS in there, and a lot of cinematographers won't complain about it, because once you put IBIS in a sensor, apparently you can't stop it from happening. Apparently the issues with it won't go away, so you have to build a sensor without IBIS because of how it's designed from its root. I guess you can't stop the sensor from moving inside the camera, so that's something to think about too. Now let's go to crop factor. Now, crop factor is very important for Canon cameras specifically. Now, I need to think about this because I'm not quite sure, because I never really thought about it, but the crop factor on APS-H sensors was like 1.5. And when I looked up the crop factor for Super 35 sensors, which all Canon cinema cameras are, It's between 1.5x and a 1.6x crop. Most Canon APS-C sensors are 1.6x crop. And what this means is that it's going to be slightly smaller than your equivalent Sony sensor, which in theory would mean you get a little bit more light capturing capability from your Sony cameras, but this also has a backside illuminated or back illuminated stack sensor in the Canon terminology. So that's something to think about too, is that this sensor might be a little bit smaller. That means you might be a little bit more close to the action. So that's something to think about, definitely. It needs to have a full HDMI port. Please, these HDMI cables are killing me when you have to use it for external monitors, like your Ninjas, and when you're trying to use ProRes outside of the Canon camera, because Canon cannot record ProRes internally. So that's something that you definitely need, because a lot of big broadcasting companies want you to have ProRes in that format if you're sending them something off. So you need to be able to shoot in those codecs. Now, it should have AVC HD, because I know a lot of Canon cinema cameras that are coming out now are starting to bring in different flavors of AVC HD. So you need to make sure that you have that codec at least. But I believe AVC HD is Sony's code. So that's another advantage Sony has over Canon. Canon doesn't do a lot of that software exporting and coding and stuff like that. So Sony, when they came in the market, they were able to take over that part of the market. The same thing with Apple. They have the ProRes codec on lock. So if I were to film in ProRes, but I use the Windows computer, it's harder for me to edit footage. So there's that. Now you have a full-size battery. Please, Canon, come out with this camera with a full-size LPE6 NH, whatever they call it, ABCDEFG battery, because this is one of the biggest issues when it comes to video, more so than pictures. If you have a picture-centric camera, it doesn't take up that much battery power, and we learned this back in the DSLR days with the 5D Mark IVs and your 5D Mark IIIs and your 1DXs and your 1DX Mark II, III, so on and so forth. They don't take a lot of battery power when they're taking pictures, because they weren't video-centric cameras. Even if they did do video, it didn't do it but only 12 minutes. And even then, when that video was being recorded, it was taking up a lot of video power or a lot of battery power from us. So have a full-size battery. CF Express Type B card slots. I cannot talk about this enough. You can see I'm sweating here. But I cannot stress this enough. Canon, you need to have dual CF Express Type B card slots. Why? Because Sony is killing you. They have dual card slots. So I'm talking about not just one SD card, but two SD cards and two CF Express Type B cards on some of these higher end Sony cameras. And we're just stuck with, like, for example, a camera that's in that price range, the R6 Mark II that's recording this right now. Please don't break down on me. The R6 Mark II only has two SD card slots. That's why I probably can only record IPB and IPB Lite and all sorts of stuff, and only in 4K. It doesn't have any all-I or anything like that. Why? Probably because the SD card is so slow in comparison to the CF Express Type B card. The CF Express Type B card really shows us what Canon's going to do in these cameras, because they tend to not put CF Express Type, or at least dual CF Express Type B card slots in any cameras except the flagship camera. So what if this camera came out with dual CF Express Type B card slots? I highly doubt it. And this really tells you what they're going to be able to do, because if the camera can't truck a lot of memory, it's probably not going to have a high resolution, a high bit depth, all these other things that require large amounts of data, which means you won't get as much image information. Even though Canon has a good color science and a good replication of what things look like, you might still want to actually be able to use some more dynamic range to pull some more highlights and shadow information. So with that said, if you don't have a CF Express Type B card or dual CF Express Type B SD card slots, not just one, like the R5 Mark I, it only has one CF Express Type B and one CF card slot. So you have two separate cards, but they're mismatched. So you can't really use them like you want to, because CF Express Type B does more than the SD card slot. So they can't take the same load at the same time, because the speeds are different and the capacities in a lot of cases are different for the speed and the cost. So do something about that, Ken. And then, of course, I don't think there's going to be any kind of raw, or there's going to be raw recording, but it's not going to be like 8K raw like R5 Mark I and the R5C. I think it's going to be a way more balanced camera, so they don't have to worry about overheating, because the FX30 didn't have a lot of issues with overheating. And that's my thoughts on this new Canon C50. I like that it's coming out because it's going to push down the prices of all the other cameras subsequent, like the R5C, which is an amazing camera, so still buy that. I'm going to put all of these affiliate links in the comment box below. That's the reason why the R7 Mark II hasn't come out, because it's coming out in the same market, in the same price range. If Canon comes out with this camera and then comes out with the R7 Mark II, it might stir up a lot of people if they haven't differentiated these cameras. They might be on the last leg of the R7 Mark II and they're like, okay, well, let me see what this camera is, what this camera's gonna do, and then we're gonna come out with the R7 Mark II when we know how well this APS-C sensor is gonna do. That's more inclined to what people want to buy right now in competition with Sony. And then they can come out with the R6 Mark II. It'll be a full frame version of maybe the R50 on the video specs. So that's something to think about, guys. What do you think in the comments below? I just wanted to get this video out. Affiliate links in the comment boxes below. Let me know what you think. Support the channel in the comments below and stay tuned for the next video.